So now that I've had a good chance to kind of take a look at the remaster, both in the player core and the GM core, it's time to kind of go over the things I like about it and the things I don't like about it. And let's go ahead and start with the things I like about the remaster. There's quite a few things that I really do like about it. I'm not going to cover every single thing in the world simply because that could take hours, quite literally. But these are the top things that I very personally like about the remaster. So my name is Don. I'm trying to be the Sly Strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. Although there are a lot of changes in the remaster, one thing to really remember is that the remaster is not a new edition. It is really 99.5% the same as the pre-remaster documents. There's just some clarifications and some things that I think are better. And I thought we'd kind of go through those. If there is a way to compare the pre-remaster with the remaster, I will go ahead and bring those up on the screen. But with that, let's go ahead and kind of get into a few things here and there. So the first one I'd like to talk about are Ancestries. Ancestries, I do like the fact that you can now have a multi-ancestry besides half elf and half orc. And although the choices aren't specifically spelled out, there are some rules to work with between the player and the GM to come up with a mixed ancestry. Plus, in the player core, there are just more ancestries to deal with without having to go into the advanced player's guide or buy additional books. Things like dwarf, elf, gnome, goblin, halfling, human, leshy, orc, expanded versatile heritages, and a section on mixed ancestries versus just the dwarf, elf, gnome, goblin, halfling, human that was available in the former player handbook. Another thing I really like is there are now a lot of changes to the skill actions and the basic actions. And let's kind of go over some of those. So skill action changes. First one, and I actually didn't mention it in my player core review, but Disarm is now more valuable and usable. I still did see some utility in it before. However, now it reads like this. Disarm, single action with the attack trait. Requirements, you have at least one hand free. The target can't be more than one size larger than you. You try to knock an item out of a creature's grasp. Attempt an athletics check against the target's reflex DC. And here is kind of where some of the changes take place in the success conditions. Critical success, you knock the item out of the target's grasp. It falls to the ground in the target's space. On a success, you weaken your target's grasp on the item. Further attempts to disarm the target of that item gain a +2 circumstance bonus, and the target takes a -2 circumstance penalty to attacks with the item or other checks requiring a firm grasp on the item. The creature can end the effect by interacting to change its grip on the item. Otherwise, it lasts as long as the creature holds the item. That's kind of the big change is before it ended prematurely, and now it lasts until the creature interacts to change its grip, which is pretty helpful. On a critical failure, you lose your balance and become off guard until the start of your next turn. So now Disarm is a lot more usable in normal fight-to-fight situations and doesn't require a critical success in order to disarm and have multiple people try to disarm in order to get that critical success with the +2. Another thing that's in the skill actions is reposition. It's in athletics, and it's different than shove in that you will move the target out of a particular position. Before with shove, you could pretty much just shove them away. Now you can grab a target and move them out of a corner. Move them away from blocking other characters to get to other parts of a combat. You can move them into a flank or move them so that you are no longer being flanked. There are many things you can do with this reposition, and it really, really helps with battlefield control. So let's go ahead and take a look at reposition. It's totally brand new. Reposition, one action with the attack trait. The requirements are you either have at least one hand free or you're grabbing or restraining the target, and the target can't be more than one size larger than you. You muscle a creature or an object around, attempt an athletics check against the target's fortitude DC. On a critical success, you move the creature up to 10 feet. It must remain within your reach during this movement, and you can't move it into or through obstacles. On a success, you move the target up to 5 feet. It must remain within your reach during this movement, and you can't move it into or through obstacles. And a critical failure, the target can move you up to 5 feet as though it successfully repositioned you. So that's kind of the downside of it, but it's still a fantastic thing. Now, when we start talking about some of the basic actions, aid got a really nice change, and the aid DC is now 15 instead of 20. And how that is helpful is it is helpful at lower levels. The only potential downside to having the aid DC be at 15 instead of 20 is aid becomes automatic at higher levels. So there's no reason to not attempt to aid one of your party members in any case whatsoever, especially once you start getting into higher levels, because there's no chance that you're actually going to critically fail. Then possibly one of the most helpful changes, I think, is the change to recall knowledge. Now, recall knowledge is so dependent on the skill section. It covers so many different skills, but let's go ahead and talk about what the changes are going to be. So with recall knowledge, you now get to suggest a skill versus declare a skill, and the GM can still use the most applicable skill that you have on your character sheet. It now states that you ask a question with an example insert that goes into greater detail of the type of questions you can ask, what you could possibly get out, as opposed to just saying to the GM, I'd like to do a recall knowledge, a nature check. Tell me what they have. Now you can actually ask specific questions and you get examples. You can also now, by rule, collaborate with the GM to come up with a question and a skill. And the GM also has the option not to give any information rather than false information on a critical failure. Now, and I said this in my last one, and it's kind of the same exact sentence here. It's not as specific as some might have wanted, and that would be me included, but it is greatly improved. Another basic action that's been added to interact is the swap basic action. So the expansion of the interact action and the addition of the swap possibility to the interact action, it really gives you more things to do. And the interact action in the equipment section of Player Core really does help new players know everything that they could possibly do. So swapping allows you to put away one item and draw another in the same action, such as putting away a dagger and drawing a mace. Abilities that specify what you do when you interact only allow this if they very specifically say so. And the example they have is the quick draw feat that lets a rogue interact to draw a weapon, but doesn't allow them to stow one as well. Swapping lets you swap only one item for another, and if you were wielding two weapons, you could put away one of them and draw a different weapon, but you would need to put away the second weapon separately. So if you are using two weapons, then you would have to have two separate swap actions if you wanted to swap both of them. Now let's move on to something from GM Core, and that would be shield runes. Shield runes are in GM Core on page 232. And shield runes allow you to do something that you couldn't before, which is to make a very specific shield. And when we say specific shield, we mean a shield that isn't just a wooden shield, but it has very specific traits. They were not really used for blocking because you were too afraid of breaking them. The breaking threshold might be too low. The total damage they could take might have been too low, and you're too afraid of breaking them. But this is basically how shield runes read now. Though shields can't be etched with weapon or armor runes, they can be improved by a specific type of fundamental rune. This is on page 225, known as a reinforcing rune. Reinforcing runes can be etched only on shields, including specific shields, and every reinforcing rune includes maximum hardness and hit point values. Since the runes work by increasing the structural integrity of a shield by a certain amount, they can't increase the durability of a shield beyond a listed maximum value. And this is a listed maximum value for each level of shield rune. Shields can't be etched with property runes, only reinforcing runes. So you can't put another rune on simply because you have this on there. It doesn't quite work like that. So this is how it actually reads. Reinforcing rune, item 4+, and they do the plus because there are multiple levels of runes, but it starts at item level 4. And magical trait, usage, it's etched onto a shield. Reinforcing runes make a shield significantly more durable, allowing it to effectively block more powerful attacks. And we'll go over just the first type. So type is minor reinforcing rune, level 4. The price is 75 gold pieces. The shield's hardness increases by 3. It gains an additional 44 hit points, and its breaking threshold increases by 22. Now, it does give you the maximum, and the maximum here is 8 hardness, 64 hit points, and 32 breaking thresholds. But it definitely makes it more logical for you to use your shield in order for blocking that you might not have done before, especially with a specific shield. Another big change is to crafting, and I'll go ahead and put both of them up. But crafting time is reduced. It goes from 4 days to only 2 days to set up, or only 1 day if you have a formula for a common item. And the other big thing is that you don't need a formula anymore for common items. It definitely makes it a lot easier. It makes it a lot quicker. It makes it much easier to do this in a shorter campaign without requiring 4 days of downtime plus whatever additional time you need. It really is helpful for crafting, and it might make it something that you would be more willing to use. Then the other thing is simplified spellcasting and clarification. The material, somatic, verbal, and focus are gone. And that's good for me specifically because they had hidden or nested traits within them that you didn't know exactly what they were unless you really specifically looked it up, but they're now gone as a separate component. And those previously hidden or nested traits are very specifically listed in the spell traits. And a good example of this is casting spells now explicitly states that you need to utter incantations in order to cast, and being unable to speak, or if you had an accommodation made with a GM for a long-term disability like sign language, if you can't do those things, it will prevent spellcasting for most spellcasters. And the only exceptions I saw to this was a subtle spell, or if you are using conceal spell where you wouldn't need the incantation or the hand motions. But it does clarify a lot of things and takes some ambiguity out of the rules. And that's a big thing, is ambiguity comes out of rules and the remaster in a lot of cases. Another thing I really like is focus spells being kind of amped up a little bit, only because you now are able to refocus easier. So your focus pool is now as big as the amount of focus spells you have, up to a max of 3 focus points. So it still can't be more than 3, but if you have 2 focus spells, you now have 2 focus points. And you can refocus fully to refill that focus pool without the older requirement of having to use a focus point before you could refocus. If you had to use a focus point before you could refocus, then you could never, let's say you had 2 focus points and you cast 2 focus spells. Well, you could only ever refocus 1 back because you'd have to use it before you could refocus again to get a second one. Therefore, you could never get to your second one until you did your daily preparations. It really is helpful. It will make focus spells easier to use, allow you to use more in each combat, because between each combat, you can now totally refill your focus pool. And I know very specifically, I'll be using them a lot more. And then the other thing that I really like about the remaster is the reorganization of the books. There is a lot to be said for being able to buy the old player's handbook and having all the player stuff, plus a good chunk of the GM stuff, so you only needed that one book in order to run a game. However, it did lead to information being kind of placed across multiple books. And by doing the split like this, the player's handbook is so much more focused, and the GM core is so more focused that it does make it so much easier to find information or know where you're going to go. And since the information density kind of went up on both books, the sidebars are now so much better, so much more organized. They actually go into subsections as opposed to just the main section. So you really do know where you are, where you've been, and where you might want to go. Possibly the only thing that can make it better is if they were hyperlinked, but I'll include that in a dislike about the remaster in another video. But the organization really is just so much better. I do like it. I do think it'll make it clearer. It is unfortunate that if you want to both play or GM, you need to buy the 2 books now because you can't get a GM section in the player handbook. However, I do think it makes it much more approachable. Now, these are just the things that I like about the remaster. I'm sure other people have different opinions, and feel free to put them in the comments. But This is kind of my thing I like, and I will put a dislike video out as well, but that'll be coming in a couple days. But I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, feel free to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. But whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.